So today what we're going to talk about. So this is based on just stuff, and I've been reading and watching videos and learning. I mean, with our obviously with our coaching business and with our marketing business, which is scaling like crazy. Like we're growing like a wildflower in the spring, and it's awesome. But it's the fact that it forces me to learn different things. These are things that I'm going to say 2 years ago, 3 years ago, I had no clue, maybe a little bit of a clue of, but nothing like what I do now. But it's all a fact of functioning in and learning into a different model, a different role. So, but it's awesome. I love it. And if the mission can still be to help grow the profession of chiropractic, to help more people get in front of chiropractors, to help more people get into your offices and learn the principle of chiropractic and be healed outside of the medical system. Wow, I mean, that's all fits right into my whole core value and my mission. So let's go through this today. I'm going to challenge your mind today. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions as we go through this. So please chime in when we do that. This is going to be very mind bending for some of you. Okay. In fact, for most of you. And I'm going to challenge you to look at things in a very different perspective today. So this is going to be, I think, very, very interesting. So here we go. So 10X mindset. And I've been reading this, reading a book, but by Dan Sullivan and Dr. Benjamin Hardy. It's called 10X is easier than 2X. But there's a lot of principles in the book that if we take and apply them to chiropractic, wow, it's going to blow your mind if you start thinking about your practice differently. So there's a story, and this is based on a story that comes from the book, and it actually is very similar to a gentleman who I knew, who was a friend of our family, but also became a patient in the office for many, many years, who had a property management business. Very, very similar story. So he started a business as a property manager, and this is going back in September 2018. Okay, so think about this. He started from scratch. He had worked in property management before, so he started his own business, and he built it from 2018 to November of 2023, so a period of about 5 years, built it to managing 60 properties. And property management was involved in organizing the rentals, whether they were short or long-term rentals. These are mostly rental properties. There were some owned properties where he would do maintenance and outside and inside maintenance, whether it's plumbing, electrical, or lawn maintenance, garden maintenance, that type of thing. But the majority were rental properties. And so he would manage the rentals. He would do all of the maintenance, like organize all of the subcontractors. He would, do all of the landscaping and all of anything that it takes to manage a property. So he had 60 properties. So a pretty viable business. Okay. So of November of 2023, and he said, we have a business. They had a couple of team members at that point. I want to scale my business up. And he said, I decided and he'd been looking at different options and different management styles, and decided he wanted to truly scale his business exponentially. So he made a new goal of growth by January 2024. So let me ask you guys a question. If you're a property manager and you say, this is you've got 60 properties under management, it's November of 2023, so you got 2 months to scale up, what would be a reasonable goal to make for December or for January 1st, 2024? What would you say? Somebody shout it out. What would be a reasonable goal? How many properties? Come on, guys. What would you say? What's a good reasonable goal? Just any number. Spit it out. You're the manager. 60 properties.
10%. 6 new properties.
6 new properties. So 10%. So that was Shaylin, right? So Shaylin says, so 66 would be a reasonable goal to get to by January in the next 2 months. So anybody else?
I'll say 70.
70. Okay, that's great. So you guys are thinking, all right, so that's good. So we can, that's reasonable goals. So he's thinking exponentially. So he makes a goal and goes to his team and says, we want to get to 500 properties in the next 2 months. They have 60 now, 500 properties. So how do you think the team's going to react when you walk in to a staff meeting and say, okay, guys, this is our goal for the next 2 months. We've got 60 properties we're managing now. We want to get to 500 properties by January of 2024. So think about this. Think about this. If this was your staff in your chiropractic office and you came in with this audacious goal, you'd probably have a staff member go, that is ridiculous. I quit, right? One of them is going to say, I don't want to be part of that. You're going to have other ones that go, wow, what a challenge. This is amazing. how are we going to do this? So what do? Well, they have a goal of 500 properties. So how will the team react? So when you think exponentially, you have to shatter the assumptions and shatter the current model. So whatever it is, whatever the systems you have built to get to 60 properties as a property manager, those are not going to work anymore. You have to think completely different. So he forced his team to think and strategize differently. So what did they do? They said, well, how can we potentially get to 500 properties over the next 2 months? So one of the team members came and said, why don't we go to one of the trends now in building is these big corporations are building communities. Why don't we go to the big, and so instead of going to property owners, why don't we go to big corporations and say, we are, and basically be bold or be arrogant. We are the busiest property management company in Canada. We'd like to take on your project now that you're building these new homes and these new communities, and we'd like to be the property managers. Well, sure enough, didn't it work? And so that was their thinking. They went to these big corporations, gated communities, these big like empire homes, big corporations who are building thousands of homes. They're buying up all these farmland, like thousands and thousands of acres of farmland. They're rezoning it and building these new subdivisions in different areas. And that's happening all over, especially in Ontario. That's happening a lot here in Canada. And a lot of immigrant people are coming in. People from other countries are coming in and moving into these new homes. I mean, you see it in your communities. So that's what they did. They went to these property managers and they did that. And sure enough, by January 1st, they raised from 60 properties to 320. So they set the goal to go to 500. They think differently. They got to 320 in 2 months. So what's that? A 4,000 or 400% increase or whatever it is. My math is maybe a 500% increase. And now here we are in May, they're at 1,600 by thinking differently. So that's the different mindset. So what happens is when you set these audacious goals, you automatically, it forces yourself to think differently. So how does this apply to chiropractic practice? And this is where I want to blow your minds today. Um, so let's think about chiropractic practice. Chiropractic, unlike many online companies or non-geographical companies, chiropractic is a local type of business. So we are a brick and mortar business. People have to come to our location to receive care, right? That's the current mindset. It's limited by physical space. So if I said to any of you right now, I had, a train full of 1,000 people coming in to get adjusted, obviously, many of you couldn't handle that. In fact, I would say all of you couldn't handle that. It's on a single day. They'd come in. You're limited by physical space. You're limited by manpower. It's very geographical. So patients in your community, that's your audience. That's where you need to attract. And it's highly doctor dependent. In other words, it's hands-on. And in most cases, no matter how big your practice is, it is typically an exchange of time for money. So in other words, people are coming in to see you to receive a service that you need to provide to them in a certain amount of time. Some of you may do that in a matter of, 30 seconds to a minute. Some of you may do that in a matter of 5 to 10 minutes or whatever time it takes for you to provide that quote unquote treatment or that visit, right? You perform that exchange. So we have to start thinking differently. So what I want you now to think about is how do you become a transformational leader? So have transformational leadership with your team. So when you have your staff meeting today, or you have your staff meeting next week, when you go into your team and start discussing different goals, let's start thinking transformationally. Let's start to change the mindset of their team. And I'm going to tell you, I actually started thinking this a long time ago. We built a very busy practice, Kim and I, but it was very much dependent on Kim and I. And we both agreed that when we set up our schedules, that when she was off, I was in the office. When she was in the office, I was off. So we had time for our children. They'd be with me when she was in the office, and they'd be with her, when I was in the office. But that wasn't good enough. So that's when we started basically attracting and hiring and leading associates and became a very associate driven practice, which then freed up our time. So it was the mindset of changing from a doctor driven practice to a team driven practice, and that freed up our time. And here's the thing, and I'll get into this a little bit, it actually allowed us to expand and grow not only our number of people we could see, but our income and everything went along with that. And we'll talk about how to do that over the next few minutes here. So let's start create goals that force our team to think differently. And when they start thinking differently, the ones that are leaders in your office will adapt. They'll adapt. And here's the thing. You can never change things with any significance by working harder in your existing reality. And this is what happens with many chiropractors, and I've seen this over the years, is that we set goals to grow, and you guys have all done it. We set goals to grow, but we try to grow in the same model that's got us to the place where we are currently. So if you think of doing things in the same model that you're doing now, which has got you to the level that you're at, and maybe you're at a comfortable level, maybe you're expanding a little bit, maybe, but you can't think with the same model, you can't think with the same procedures and grow to the next level without starting to change some things or starting to adapt to a different model. So to change anything, we must build a new model derived from different thinking that makes the old model look completely obsolete. Transformational leadership. So we're going to start making some stretch goals. And these are things I want you to start discussing with your team. What are stretch goals? So a stretch goal might be a seemingly impossible goal. It's an audacious goal. It creates an intentional identity crisis. So it's going to force your team, it's going to force you to question what it is you're doing right now. Is what you're doing right now going to create the reality or create the future that you truly want? And it forces you to question the previously successful framework. So whatever you've done to build your practice to this point, it's going to force you to question that. Am what I or is what I'm doing correct? Is it going to help me to get to the next level? What pieces of that do I have to change? It shifts your attention. And when you shift your attention, you create a shift of intention. So attention creates intention. Intention creates focus, and focus will create a new reality. So new actions, new reality. So linear goals. So if we're thinking, in practice, and this is where I want you guys to kind of shout out. So let's see. So some of you are kind of around the 200 patient per week mark. Let's just say, for example, maybe you're 250, 300, whatever that is. If we were to make a linear goal, what would be a reasonable goal working in the model that you're working in right now? What would be a reasonable goal if you're seeing 200 patients per week to get to by the end of 2024? Shout it out. What would be a reasonable goal without changing too much? What do you think? Anybody?
300.
300.
That's what I thought. Yeah, and honestly, that's what I came up with. I would say if I was thinking with the same model without changing too many things significantly, with keeping the same staff, it would be reasonable to say if I had 200 patient visits per week, if we really put some things in place, we could get to 300. But let's say now I challenge you and I go, okay, let's make some exponential goals and say, okay, we have a practice of 200 patient visits per week. I want you to stretch your goal and say we want to get to 1,000 patients a week. Is the model that's created a practice of 200 patient visits per week going to be the same model that sustains a practice of 1,000 a week? And I'm sure all your answers are going to be no. And if anybody answers yes, it's not going to happen. I mean, maybe you could stretch it, but it's not sustainable. So anything that's sustainable, we have to think in a different model. So let's just think about this for a second. So we're seeing 200 patient visits per week. We want to get to 1,000 a week. Time frame is the accelerating factor. If I said to you, okay, we have a 200 patient visit per week practice. Yes, your goal is maybe it's an expansive goal. I want to get to 1,000 a week. When would you like that to happen? And somebody said, well, I think maybe 2 years, 3 years down the road. Okay. 2 years, 3 years down the road. And can I ask whoever's talking in the background that doesn't have your phone muted, can you mute it if you don't mind? So if you're thinking expansively and exponentially, then time frame's the accelerating factor. In 2 to 3 years, okay, well, that's reasonable. And that doesn't put a tremendous amount of stress on my team. It doesn't create an urgency to adapt to a new model. But if I said, okay, we're seeing 200 patient visits per week, we want to get to 1,000 patients per week by September 1st of this year. That gives us about 3 and a bit months, June, July, August. All of a sudden, holy crapola, like now we have to, the model changes significantly. How are we going to do that? Well, my goodness. Okay, how are we going to do that? So there's a theory called the Einstein model of thinking, which says that your present determines the meaning of the past. So most of us grow up in the reality that we are where we are. Our past has determined where we are in our life. And especially for those people, and we talk about people who, maybe had traumatic pasts or had things happen to them in the past. Guys, I'm just going to try to mute everybody right now because there's somebody that doesn't have their phone muted. It's actually really it's really loud. So if you're hearing this, can you just please everybody just mute their phone until we start having a conversation? That'd be great. Appreciate that. So now if I say, okay, well, we've had a traumatic past and that's got you to your present, the Einstein model of thinking says, well, now if we look at the present with a sense of gratitude and say we are where we are because of things that happened in the past, all of a sudden we can reframe that. We can think things differently. We can be grateful for those things, even if they were traumatic for us in the past, because they have caused our pathway to get to where we are in the present. So instead of blaming our past for where we are, we can be thankful for our past for where we are. And now, if we take that same thinking, that Einstein model of thinking, and say, okay, I can see my future. I have audacious goals. I've expanded my thinking. I'm going to create the model that allows me to think differently and allows me to get to those audacious goals in the future. Well, now my future goal can change the perspective of my present. So my present circumstances can automatically start to change based on my goal for the future. So I can start thinking differently based on that goal, and it causes me to expand the walls of my thinking. So maybe the model that I'm currently working in is not the same model that's going to get me to those goals in the future. So that's where I need to start thinking. So many of you are caught in a reality and caught in a model in your practice. You want to grow, or you want to see things differently, or you want to create more freedom or more family time or have more income, whatever that is. And in your mind, you're going, oh my gosh, I work too many hours. I don't have the time. I can't grow. My staff is not trained well enough. There's no chance we're going to be able to sustain this volume right now. We've grown 100 visits a week, but it's chaos and it's, self-sabotage, and there's no way we can sustain this for the long term. There's all these things that go through our minds as chiropractors. So that's where we need to change the thinking, which then changes the model and changes the procedures to reach the reality we want to reach. So here's a big picture business question. If you made an audacious goal, and you don't have to answer this live here, but I want you to kind of maybe even write this down and think to yourself, if you made an audacious goal, and I'm going to throw some audacious goals at you. So maybe you decided to take on an associate. Maybe you decided to expand your practice. Maybe double your practice or triple your practice from what it is right now, which is obviously going to take some time and some effort. Maybe you're going to decide to totally change your team because your team is not fulfilling that goal or fulfilling that mission for you, and you're just dragging them along for the ride until you're waiting. Many of us do this. We wait till something happens where we've got a team member who's it would be tougher or more challenging or perhaps more confrontational to go and just have the conversation to let them go at this point. But what we're doing is we're just kind of stringing them along, hoping that they're going to leave, where then we have to find somebody else to fill their goal, but they're not serving their purpose and they're certainly not serving our purpose. So if you made that audacious goal to change your team, to have a big goal in your practice, to sell your practice, to take on an associate, maybe to relocate, how would everyone around you react? So how would your spouse react? How would your family react? How would your staff or your team react? And a lot of times we don't make these goals for fear of the reaction of other people. And I know darn well this has gone through many of your minds because it's natural. It goes through everybody's mind. It went through my mind when we decided that this was the right time to sell our practice. Oh my gosh, all the mental gymnastics we had to go through to try to get ourselves to that point to say, yes, this is the right decision. Be willing to disappoint others to achieve your vision and purpose. So in other words, you become so clear on your vision and your purpose that although you love the people around you, You can't let those people hold you back from where you want to go. And that is a big, huge step. Huge step. So let's go through this. We're going to go through this practice analysis. So based on this 10x thinking, we're going to go through this practice analysis, and this is going to be a really a game changer for many of you. If I was a buyer, now that I've been involved in well, I'm going to say over a dozen purchases and sales from different clients that I've helped out on different levels, done practice evaluations or valuations for, and then selling our practice, helping my son buy his practice in Florida, so directly and indirectly involved in a lot of different practice purchases. I've learned a lot, and I know now what to look for. And I'm going to share with you a few different things that I know many of you probably haven't even thought of, as far as what it would take for somebody to come and purchase your practice, what they'd be looking for, or if you were purchasing a practice, what you'd be looking for. But I want you to take the position of, let's say you were a buyer of your practice. Okay, so this is a diligent buyer. Now you're the buyer coming in to look for what's going on in your practice. And so these are some things that I want you to think about putting in place, not only for the immediate present, but for your future, not only to help your practice become a very viable business and sustain and grow to the goal you want to grow, because these are all scalable things that you can do to grow to whatever level you choose to grow and think differently. But also, if it ever came to the time where you decided, hey, you know what, I think I do want to move. I want to go to a different province. I want to go to a different country. I want to move to a different city, whatever that is. I want to sell my practice. These are things that a buyer would look for. So the first thing is there a consistent flow of lead generation? So obviously, the majority of us are doing Facebook marketing or some sort of marketing where we're bringing lead generation in. That's one form of lead generation. Other forms of lead generation involve people being attracted to you, right? You being the key doctor of influence. You're the key chiropractor of influence in your community. So in other words, they're not coming so much for chiropractic services. They're coming because they want to be part of you and whatever you're delivering. You could be, and here's the thing is that when you become the key doctor of influence, you have influence over people's lives. People respect you. They get to a level of, listening to what you say, taking heed of what you say, really understanding that you're a knowledgeable person in whatever aspects, all aspects of health and life and longevity and vitality. And if you can become that person, you create a steady flow of referrals and a steady flow of people who want to be around you. So let me say this is that when you become that person, you can actually go to a different business. Let's say another business hired you. You would then also have a following of people that would come to other businesses. So in other words, if you became a spokesperson for a car company, or if you became a spokesperson for some sort of product, maybe even a health product would be more applicable, people would buy that product just because you're the spokesperson of that product, because they trust you so much. So this is the type of thing that I want us to kind of think about and talk about. So consistent flow of lead generation. So if I'm buying a practice, that's the first thing I'm going to look for. Does this practice act like a business? A consistent flow of lead generation. A viable business, okay? And I'm talking chiropractic practice, but any type of business requires a few things. So number one is lead generation, lead conversion, customer ascension, and then recurring revenue. Those four things are necessary for a viable business. So as we go through this, think about those things. So are there consistent systems in place for predictable lead conversion? So when we talk about, when Dr. Brian and I talk about training for your team, that is a consistent system that must be in place for your team to be able to take those leads, get them in the office, get them scheduled for their appointments, get them in the office, and then take them through the systems that make them say, this is a place I want to be, not just for me, but for my spouse, for my children, for my immediate family, and for my friends and extended family. They become warriors for your practice and for chiropractic. So these are systems that we must put in place for that predictability. The next thing is is if I was buying your practice or if you were buying your own practice, is there a high amount of monthly recurring revenue? So in a chiropractic standpoint, are there patients on regular maintenance care? Do you have a large number of your practice members coming in for regular care, not because they're in pain, because they know the value of keeping their spine in line on some sort of a regular basis, whether that's weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, whatever that is. And what does that amount to? And ideally, I'm going to say that should be minimum half of your monthly revenue. Half of your monthly revenue at least should be that monthly recurring revenue of maintenance type of patients. That's what I'm going to look for. Okay. So, and let me tell you this example. So we have a client in our marketing systems now who is spending, and this is no word of a lie, 24,000 a month in ad spend. He's attracting about 80 to 100 new patients a week. He wants to keep his practice at 6 figures a month, but the average lifespan of those patients is about 6 visits. So he's attracting it's just a new patient treadmill. That's all it is. It's just a new patient turnstile where they're just coming in the door, they stay for a few visits, and there's no monthly recurring revenue. So it's all upfront. So that is not a viable business model. It's not a good practice model. There's no influence that he has on these patients. It's just a regular recurring stream of new patients coming in. So do you have a database? If I come in and bought your practice, do you have a database of patients? So for some of you have been around for a while. So, I mean, for example, Kevin, Tony, you guys have been in practice for a long time. 15, 20 years. Shaylin's been in practice 25 years or more. Justine's been in practice a long time. You guys have a database of patients who have been there and maybe are not there in your office anymore. Some have not been in for a year, 2 years, 5 years, whatever it is, but there's a huge database of patients. Are you in regular contact with them? Do you have a system in place just to basically send them? Maybe it's a monthly newsletter. Maybe it's a regular email. Maybe it's a weekly email just to say, hey, this is what we're doing in our office. These are things going on. Hey, we have a new staff member. You're just constantly communicating with them and you're constantly in their inbox or talking to them on some level, or I should say maybe even talking at them on some level. So you're in their mind. And when you're in their mind, guess who they're going to refer their friend to when their friend is having a health issue that needs to see a chiropractor? Because you're in their mind, they're going to say, hey, I've had people that I've met that haven't been in, for 10 or 15 years and introduce me as their chiropractor. This is my chiropractor. I mean, this fellow hasn't seen me for 15 years, but he still calls me their chiropractor. So there's ways of communicating, and that in itself just builds goodwill for you in the community. So that's, if I'm buying a practice, I'm looking for that. Do you have that system in place? Are there revenue streams beyond doctor generated? This, guys, is huge. If you have a practice and your main source of revenue is because of what you are delivering for patients, in other words, patients are on care plans to see the doctor to pay for their adjustments, and that is the main source of revenue, you don't own a business. You own a practice, and what I'm going to say basically is you own a job. That's what you do. You own a job. So, and there's many people in our group that do that. It's, you're so focused on care. And Stephen and I were talking about this at the beginning of the call. You're so focused on caring for people, and that's your main source of revenue. We're not thinking outside the box to say, how can we create a business model that drives itself when I'm not there? And I'm going to tell you, so Kim and I started thinking about this years ago, is that we wanted freedom. As I mentioned earlier, we wanted freedom. So we start talking about creating a business model that works when we're not in the office. I want to make passive income when I'm sleeping. I want to make sure. So, obviously we had our associates come in, so we could be off in the associates. And I always had the mindset, I wanted to train an associate with the intention that I was equipping them to have their own practice. I knew that they weren't going to be a forever thing. I knew that it was a short-term thing, but I poured so much into every single associate we had that I wanted them to have their own practice. And every single associate that we've had over the years now has their own practice, including the one who bought our practice, has his own practice. And the cool thing is that practice was such a good business model that it has sustained itself relatively well through the transition. It's been almost 2 years to the day, and they're seeing within about 10% of what they were seeing as far as collections go, when the time that we actually made the transaction. So that's a sign of a good business model. So the question is, if somebody looked at your business model and said, okay, well, if the doctor becomes sick, if the doctor is not there, if the doctor is the main source of revenue and that doctor leaves, what happens to that practice? What happens to that business? Does it close the doors? That's not a good business model. So we got to start talking about, okay, how can we generate revenue streams that are going to not only give us freedom, create passive income, but allow our business to become a sustainable business when we're not there. Okay. The next thing is there a high ticket package available? You all have, and you know who they are. There's going to be a handful of patients in your office, maybe a very small percentage of patients in your office who love you, who will do everything, who, if you have a new nutritional supplement, they'll buy it. If you have a new piece of home care, they'll buy it. If you have a new care plan, yes, they want it, whether it's new corrective care. You get Serviguards in your office, yes, they want it. There's those people. And so my question is, and I ask this to many docs, is that how many, for example, how many $16,000 care plans have you sold in the last year? And they look at me kind of funny, like a $16,000, what's that? A $16,000 care plan? And I'm going to say probably nobody on this line has a $16,000 care plan. Well, you haven't sold any because you don't have them. So start thinking about this, is that you'll have patients that actually, if you had that offer of a $16,000 care plan, and it could be a stack of services, maybe a $16,000 care plan includes chiropractic, it includes nutritional counseling, it includes lifestyle coaching, it includes extraneous services. Some of you have, whether it's decompression or modalities or whatever else you offer, and you package them all together, and all of a sudden that becomes, that adds up to a $12, $13, $16,000 care plan. You're going to have patients who want that just because they believe in you, and they believe that you're going to give them something that's good for them. Now, obviously, you want to make it effective, and you want to make it something that the patient needs and is going to get benefit out of. But if you don't have them in place, you're never going to provide them for anybody, and nobody's going to get benefit out of them. So start thinking this way, is that there's potential in your office to add these different services in, and there are patients who want to buy these things if they're in place. Is your team, okay, is your staff, your team, dedicated to the mission of chiropractic, or are they dedicated to the owner? So if you're buying your practice and you're taking an outside view of your practice, if you left your practice, let's say you left your practice, and I know a couple of you are thinking of selling your practice, maybe moving to the States, moving down to Florida, whatever that is. If you leave, is that team going to say, okay, well, I knew I was working for this doc and that doc is now gone. I'm leaving too. Or is your team dedicated to the fact that, we have a mission here. There's people in our community that are sick and dying, and this is why I come to work every day. And I'm going to say we were so blessed with the team that we created in the office, and so out of 6 team members, 5 of them are still there, working with the owner that took over, the new owner that took over our practice, just because they're all dedicated to the mission. So these are, again, good questions to ask yourself. Is my team dedicated to this mission? Or if I was to sell my practice next month, would the team disappear? Are there community partnerships in place? And this is the sign of a healthy business. So you want to start thinking exponentially, and you want to start thinking 10x, start making community partnerships. And I want you to think about this. So, we've all talked about lunch and learns and getting into different companies and whatnot. There are companies, there are groups, there are sports teams in your area who would love to have a health consultant, who would love to have an expert of your knowledge to be able to come into their business, their place of business, and consult their employees on healthy workplaces, ergonomics, nutrition, raising healthy families, keeping a balance in life, work and life balance, to be able to go in and do health talks, to be able to do weight loss programs, to be able to counsel them on medication dangers, and to go in and do talks about that. There are opportunities there, and it could be companies of 2, 3, 4, 600, 1,000 people in your communities that want you. And it's basically as simple as making a phone call to the HR person and say, hey, I'm Dr. So-and-so. I have one of the busiest practices in Calgary. I have one of the busiest practices in Toronto. I have one of the busiest practices in Brantford, Ontario. I would love to offer my services to come in and be your health coach and health consultant for your employees. How does that sound to you? Maybe you work out an agreement with them that they pay you a retainer. Maybe you work out an agreement with them that they just allow you to come in on a monthly basis and do talks to their employees. Maybe they work out an agreement where you come in and you actually set up a portable table and start adjusting people one day a week in the workplace. And you can see maybe 50 employees or 100 employees in a matter of a few hours, 2, 3 hours in the workplace. And the company's paying for that. There's all kinds of options if you start to expand your mindset. But if I'm buying your practice, I want to know how many community partnerships are in place and what do those community partnerships look like? So in other words, how many people in the community know about your practice and are associated with your practice in some way? And the other thing is the online health of your office strong? Listen, and now that I'm in this world, I know how important this is, and I've seen so many of our new clients have such, and they're wondering why they're not busy because their online health is terrible. People find you online. Let's be honest now. It's not, there's no newspaper ads, there's no yellow pages anymore. If people are looking for your office, they need online assistance. They go to Google, they start looking for chiropractors in their area, or they look for somebody, maybe it's not even a chiropractor, they look for somebody who treats such and such condition. And if your online presence is weak, and if your website is archaic and old, and if you have a website that's just very much like an encyclopedia, it's just a frequently asked question website, then you are way behind the times. So it's time to upgrade those things. The website needs to be very active. Patient testimonials, video testimonials should be at the forefront. I welcome video of you so the patient, the prospective patient, gets to know you right on the front page of your website. A call to action, your offer on the website, a chat widget where they can actually engage in a text message conversation immediately from the website. That's a website that generates leads. That's a website that calls people to action, to take action, to put your office in the forefront. Not to mention your presence on social media or on YouTube or on these things. So these are all really important factors, to start to gain a presence in your community. And that is another way to measure the value of your practice when it comes to purchasing your practice. So if I was going to come in and purchase your practice, these are all things that I would be looking for. How valuable is that practice? It's not all about your collections. It's about the potential of that practice to grow and to be, something scalable. So here's the thing, and these are all things that I've dealt with over the years. And I know many of you, what happens is, and I see this so often with chiropractors, and I can tell you again from experience, we get into our modes where we tread water. Life is okay. We want to expand, but what happens is in our current mindset, we expand by thinking, for me to grow, I need to put more time into my practice. It's going to take time away from my family. I need to spend more time. I need to spend more money on marketing. I need to do these things. And that's not always the case. The case is if we put the right strategies in place, you can scale and grow, not at the expense of your free time. You can scale and grow and gain more free time. And this is what happens if we think in our current model. We might put time and effort into our practice. Maybe we grow 50 visits, 100 visits, and we get to the point where, oh my gosh, my life's out of balance. And then we say, okay, well, I can't put that same time and effort anymore. I got to spend more time with my family, my kids. I didn't get a chance to see my kids play at school, or missing my kids' sporting events. What happens is we divert our attention and our intention, and then our practice goes back down again. So what I'm talking about is let's talk about, and if you want to set, this is not stuff we coach on all the time. So if you want to set up some calls directly on how to put these scaling strategies in place so that your office can grow, but not at the expense of your free time, these are all things that we want to talk about. Building an online presence, which actually creates value and creates an online notoriety for you in your community. So people start to recognize you, and you'll have people who are not patients recognize you in the grocery store, in the hardware store, because they see you so much online. And you gain that reputation, and I mentioned this before, is that Robin Dunbar is an actual social scientist that says that for people to want to do business with you, they need 7 touch points or 11 hours of your time. So 7 different touch points. So if they see you on social media, they see you on YouTube, they see you in an advertisement, whatever that is, you've gone and done a talk at their church, or you've been to their company. They finally, so it's not, so we think we're going to go and put a Facebook ad and somebody's going to come in and become a lifetime patient because they saw our Facebook ad. It doesn't happen that way. They need to create a relationship with you. And sometimes people have a one-way relationship with you. They feel they know you, even though you've never met them before, because of your online presence. So if you want to talk about that, that's again stuff that I can help you with. You want to become the key chiropractor of influence in your community? Build your personal brand, because your personal brand drives your business. People come to a business because of the personal brand. And you see this everywhere. I mean, Elon Musk is a perfect example. People buy Teslas because of Elon Musk. People buy Virgin Mobile because of Richard Branson. People bought Apple computers because of Steve Jobs, or iPhones because of Steve Jobs. And now that's transitioned into Tim Cook. So you can see these people of influence that have built these huge businesses, not because of the business brand, but because of the key person of influence that's driving it. So what I'm suggesting is that you decide to become the key person of influence in your community. I remember years ago, and I think I've shared this story with you guys before internet, before Facebook marketing, we hired a full-time marketing manager, and her whole job, she didn't work in the office, she worked outside the office. We paid her very handsomely. At the time, she was making about $1,000 a week. But her whole job was to set up talks, to set up makeovers, to set up screenings, to get us out in the public. And literally, I was out 4 nights a week, and on the weekend, we had talks at churches, we had talks at support groups. And I mean, it was unbelievable, the results that we got. And that's what helped us grow to 1,200 a week at that point. And it became to the point where it got to the point where it's unsustainable. So we got to that point at 1,200 a week where we just couldn't, we had to say, listen, you've done a fantastic job. She was with us for 4 years, but we can't have you anymore, because we can't possibly grow any more than what we are now. And sure enough, when we stopped doing those strategies, we went back down again, and back down to 1,000 or 800, somewhere in that neighborhood. So, putting these things in place, becoming the key person of influence, building your personal brand, involves you becoming seen in the community. And that's one thing as well, is that each of you are so knowledgeable. You have so much to offer people in your community. You have so much to offer potential patients. Don't be afraid to get out there and speak unfiltered. You're going to create some enemies, but you're going to create a huge following as a result of that. And I tell you what, and that's one thing that I did. I became very vocal about, and I mean, this was very prevalent. People on medications. When you go do a talk, the majority of people there are taking cholesterol pills. They're taking heart medication. They're standing in line for the prickle arm candy. I'm not going to use the word because I don't want YouTube to take this video off the the platform. So what happened. So I was very vocal about that. And yes, did it get me in some trouble? Absolutely, it got me in some trouble. But that's okay. I invited that because I knew I was telling the truth to people. So don't be afraid to go out there and speak the truth unfiltered, because you will gain a huge following as a result of that, and create this life of freedom, right? And I know that when I was doing that the time that I spent going out and talking to people, using my voice, using my knowledge, using even my opinions on health and wellness and caring for yourself, were much more valuable than the time I could spend in my office. much more valuable. I could create more of a presence when I was out speaking to people, creating this notoriety, getting people to understand and getting people as a following. That was much more valuable than the time I could spend adjusting. So what did we do? We put people in place to do the adjusting. You know, I cut my hours back, so I'd still do some adjusting, but I spent the majority of my time out there talking to people, and that grew our practice exponentially. We made a heck of a lot more income and more collections and more money as a result of doing that than if I would have just stayed in my office and tried to adjust more people and ran more ads and whatever else I did. So create this life that you want to create. Use your knowledge, use your your opinions, use your time wisely to create a following. And you know what happens is then you start attracting people who want to be part of your vision, who want to be part of your mission. Associates come and want to work with you. You start adding these passive income streams, and again, we can talk about this, and that's another avenue that we're working in towards, is creating passive income streams. You want to create a course. Maybe you're an expert in something. Maybe you're an expert in um, you know, maybe you're simply an expert in exercise and in creating a strong core, creating exercises for people with lower back pain. Maybe you're an expert in nutrition. I went out and got a nutritional degree for a couple reasons. Number one, because it positioned me as an expert in nutrition, and we created a nutritional piece of our practice in the last few years of our practice that was extremely profitable. We were collecting 15 to 20K a month just in nutrition on top of our chiropractic, which I passed over to a staff member when we left, and she's carried that on as well. But you become an expert in something, and that can create an additional income stream. Create an online course because you're an expert, and then you can scale that as big as you want to sell your online course, which creates this passive income while you're sleeping. You know, it doesn't have to be all about being in the office and laying your hands on people to become the key chiropractor, key doctor of influence in your community. And if it gets to the time where you want to create a business that is very attractive and very saleable, and one of the trends right now is for big corporations to come and buy these health practices. It's really dominant in the insurance industry. And the insurance industry now, just like, let's say you have a car accident, you talk to your insurance company and they have the recommended body shops. Well, what they've done, they've gone to those body shops and they've worked out deals to pay them a minimal amount for the repair of your car. So they will recommend a body shop that you take your car to after an accident that the insurance company pays the most minimal amount to get your car fixed. So in other words, they're managing their expenses. Well, they're doing the same thing in chiropractic. You know, insurance companies are going around looking for chiropractic offices to purchase to be the recommended chiropractor to send accident or personal injury victims to. So the insurance is fully, paid for, but they're paying a minimal amount to those. So they will go and they'll buy these chiropractic offices and they'll hire chiropractors to work in the chiropractic offices to pay them as minimal as they can to send those patients in. And that actually happened to Dr. Amir. Dr. Amir, who, if you remember, did the talk on motor vehicle accident insurance billing. Corporation came along and bought his practice for top dollar, and he's no longer in practice because they bought his practice, and now they're running his practice like one of those types of chiropractic practices where they're sending PI patients to. So there's all kinds of different things to think about when it comes to selling your business and positioning your business as something that's very scalable.